At 6 a.m., sharp, the scream tore through the apartment building like a bomb going off. It wasn't just noise, it was shock, rage, and entitlement exploding all at once. Bang, bang, bang. My mother-in-law, Evelyn, was kicking my front door like she wanted to break it off the hinges. "Maya Patel Harper, open this door right now." Her voice rattled the hallway, waking every neighbour on the 3rd floor. Someone upstairs yelled for her to shut up. A baby started crying. A dog barked in agitation. The whole building was alive because of her, and I sat at the kitchen table, waiting. The envelope lay in front of me, white, perfectly sealed, placed in the centre like evidence in a courtroom. I had rehearsed this moment for 3 straight weeks, memorising every breath, every word, every step. My coffee was cold. My hands were steady. Then Daniel stumbled out of the bedroom, hair wild, t-shirt inside out, socks mismatched, panic on his face. What the hell is happening? Another kick hit the door. Thud! 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 His mother screamed again. "She changed my lock on my son's apartment. She's gone insane!" Her keys jingled wildly outside, the spare set she had made without asking. "For emergencies, darling. You never know," she had said. I looked at the sandwich bag on the counter, containing the old lock she used to let herself in whenever she pleased. Sometimes 10 p.m, sometimes 6 a.m, sometimes without knocking at all. Not anymore. Daniel reached the door, touched the new steel deadbolt, and froze. "You changed the lock?" I didn't answer. I simply pushed the envelope toward him. It slid across the wooden table with a slow, deliberate whisper. "Open it, Daniel." He stared at me like he couldn't recognize the woman sitting in front of him. Calm, composed, unshaken. Outside, Evelyn furiously scraped her old key against the new lock. The metal screeched in protest, each failed attempt sharper than the last. Then, suddenly, silence. Daniel hesitated, fear tightening his jaw. "Maya, please, talk to me." My voice was cold, steady, rehearsed. "Open it. Now." He swallowed hard and peeled the tape. The sound, ripple, felt like a bandage being torn from a long infected wound. Inside lay a single old photograph, edges curled a folded sheet of paper, creased into perfect thirds. The photo lay on top. Daniel lifted it slowly, almost trembling. A hospital hallway. Fluorescent lights buzzing. A teenage boy, him at 16, lying on a gurney. Left eye swollen shut, lips split, dried blood on his chin. A nurse in the background trying not to stare. And standing next to him, Evelyn, younger, sharper, colder, arms crossed, jaw clenched, eyes full of rage, not concern. The date stamped in red, March 14th, 2011. Daniel touched the bruised cheek of his younger self, and his voice cracked. I thought she threw this away. I didn't blink. I found it, and now you understand why the lock was changed. When I stepped out of the courthouse that morning, the world felt heavier than ever. The sky was grey, the air cold, and every breath reminded me that I was officially alone again. The divorce papers were still in my hand, crumpled, damp with the sweat of my shaking fingers. After years of sacrifice, loyalty, and trying to make a home out of something broken, I walked away with nothing. No savings, no house, no support, not even respect. For days I lived in a dazed routine. Wake up, stare at the ceiling, try not to cry, try not to remember. But pain has a way of sitting beside you, even in silence. Every corner of the house reminded me of a mistake. Every sound felt like an echo of the life that slipped away. I started questioning myself. Where did I go wrong? Why wasn't I enough? Why did everything crumble the moment I needed stability the most? One evening, while searching through an old drawer for a document, my hand brushed against something cold. I pulled it out slowly, confused. It was an old bank card. The plastic looked worn, the edges slightly cracked. I stared at it for a long time, trying to remember when I opened that account or why it was hidden so deep. But there was no memory, no clue, nothing that explained its existence. For a moment, I dismissed it. I nearly tossed it back inside and closed the drawer. But something held me still. Something in me whispered that I should check it. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was hope clinging to its last thread. Or maybe it was just the universe finally turning towards me instead of away. I knew I had almost nothing left in my current account. I knew the card might not even work. But that night, lying awake in the dark, the image of that old card kept flashing in my mind, as if it was waiting to reveal something I had long forgotten. And deep inside, for the first time in weeks, a tiny spark lit up. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, everything wasn't over yet. Daniel didn't move for several seconds after reading the last line of the paper. His eyes stayed locked on the page, as if each sentence struck him with a force his body couldn't absorb all at once. When he finally looked up, it wasn't anger on his face. It wasn't confusion. It was something far older, something buried so deep that even he had forgotten it existed. Pain, raw, unfiltered, and decades old, bubbled up into his expression like a bruise rising under the skin. He blinked hard once, twice, as though trying to force the memory back into whatever locked room in his mind his mother had shoved it into. I watched him swallow, watched his throat tighten, watched his breath wobble like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, trying not to fall. Outside, Evelyn's shadow passed under the door again as she paced, muttering to herself, her voice sharp enough to slice through wood. But inside the apartment, the air turned heavy, thick, stretched tight, with something that felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Daniel sank slowly into the chair across from me, the paper trembling between his fingers. His voice came out low, hoarse, almost hollow. "Where did you get this?" he asked, though he already knew. I could see the realization forming behind his eyes, widening them with the kind of dread only people with wounded childhoods truly understand. I told him the truth. I found it in Evelyn's old storage box when she asked me to clean her things. She must have forgotten it was there. She must have thought that the years would erase everything she had done. She must have believed no one would ever expose the part of her life she spent decades rewriting. Daniel lowered his head into his hands, elbows on the table, the paper crumpling slightly between his palms. The silence stretched again, interrupted only by his uneven breathing. The truth was settling over him like dust, light, gentle, but impossible to ignore. Outside, Evelyn banged the door again, louder this time. "Daniel, she's manipulating you. Don't you dare believe anything she gives you." Her voice cracked at the end, and I could tell she heard the shift inside the apartment, even if she didn't understand it yet. Daniel didn't respond. He let the memories crawl back, one by one. The nights he slept at friends' houses, the fights that were chalked up as discipline, the bruises he told his teachers were from falling down the stairs, the way Evelyn blamed everyone except herself. His voice trembled when he finally spoke again. "I thought I dreamed it. I thought maybe I made it worse in my head." I reached across the table and placed my hand near his, not touching, just close enough that he could take it if he chose. "You didn't imagine anything," I said quietly. "She hurt you, and she never stopped hurting you. She just changed the method." His shoulders caved inward, as if the truth had punched straight through the years of denial he had built to survive her. The envelope lay between us, no longer just paper but a doorway, one he couldn't unsee, one he couldn't close. "She was supposed to protect me," he whispered, his voice breaking in a way I had never heard before. Then he lifted his head, tears gathering in his eyes but not falling, and something new, something resolute, settled in his expression. "She doesn't get to walk into our home whenever she wants," he said slowly. "Not anymore." Outside, Evelyn struck the door again, but this time her voice wasn't furious. It was frightened. And for the first time since the screaming started at 6 a.m, Daniel didn't flinch. He straightened, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and reached for the envelope again. Not because he needed the proof, but because he was ready to face what was inside it. Daniel's fingers trembled as he lowered the photograph onto the table, but he didn't let it go. His thumb stayed pressed against the corner, like he needed the contact to stay upright. His breathing had changed too. It was no longer sharp or panicked. It was slow, uneven, almost fragile, as if each inhale scraped against something old inside him. The hallway outside our apartment remained silent, an eerie, waiting silence, but I could feel Evelyn's presence behind the door, like a storm cloud pressing its weight against the wood. She wasn't screaming now. She was listening for cracks, listening for control. For years, she had built her power on being the loudest voice in a room. Now, she had none. Daniel finally unfolded the letter. The paper made a soft whispering sound, but to me it felt deafening. 3 paragraphs, typed, no signature at the bottom. I watched his eyes move over the lines, watched them widen, then narrow, then fill with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Memory. Real memory. Not the half versions Evelyn had fed him, not the diluted stories she'd retold every holiday, but the truth. He swallowed hard. This is from the hospital?" he asked, but his voice was barely a voice at all. It was more like a breath shaped into a question. "Yes," I said. "The social worker's copy. She gave it to me when we got married. She told me to keep it. Said one day you would need it." Daniel looked up at me sharply, not angry, startled. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried, Daniel." I leaned back slightly, letting the words settle between us. But every time I got close, she inserted herself between us. She always knew how to talk so fast that no one else could get a word in. You know that. His jaw worked slowly as if he were chewing on the truth, and it was bitter. The letter trembled slightly in his hand. I could see the exact moment he reached the paragraph that mattered, the one the social worker had written after interviewing him at 16. The one that described the night Evelyn slapped him so hard he hit his head on the bathroom sink. The one that mentioned prior incidents, patterns, evidence, the bruises that didn't match the accident story she told. Daniel pressed his fist against his mouth, eyes closing, shoulders curling inward like a boy again. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The ticking clock, the buzzing refrigerator, and the faint hum of a pipe in the wall filled the silence with a low, dull rhythm. Then he whispered, "I don't remember writing this." "You didn't," I said gently. "You told the social worker what happened. She wrote it for you because you were too shaken to hold the pen." His eyes opened slowly, raw, red, softer than I'd ever seen them. "I was scared," he said, barely audible. "God, I forgot I was scared of her." "You didn't forget," I corrected softly. "You buried it because she taught you that loving her meant excusing her. She taught you that survival was loyalty." A soft thud hit the door from outside, Evelyn's palm perhaps, or her forehead leaning against the wood. Her breathing was audible now, shallow and desperate, like someone trying to breathe through a straw. Daniel didn't look toward the sound. He stared at the floor, still holding the letter, his voice fraying at the edges. "She told me I fell," he said. "She told me I slipped on the stairs. She said I was being dramatic. She always rewrote to reality, I murmured. That's why she was so furious when she found out about the new lock. Not because of the lock itself, but because it was the first time you didn't let her have the final version of the story. He sank into the nearest chair, elbows on his knees, hands dangling loosely between them. The photograph lay face up beside him, 16-year-old Daniel watching his older self crumble. For the first time that morning, he didn't try to hide it. He didn't try to rationalize it. He didn't minimize it. He looked at it fully, painfully, as though staring at a scar he had never admitted belonged to him. A long moment passed before he finally said, "Maya, I'm sorry for everything. I should have protected you from her." "You couldn't," I said softly. "Not when you never learned how to protect yourself." Something shifted in his face, something deep and quiet. For years, he had carried the belief that he was the bridge between me and his mother, that he had to keep peace at any cost. But now he understood that the cost had always been him. A final, soft knock touched the door. "Daniel," Evelyn called, voice thin and trembling. "Baby, open the door, please." But Daniel didn't move. His shoulders straightened, and he lifted his chin with a slowness that felt like watching a person stand after years of crawling. He looked at me, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked free. Daniel didn't move for several seconds after finishing the letter. He just stood there, shoulders slumped, one hand gripping the edge of the table, as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. The morning light had shifted, warming the room in soft gold, but he looked drained, older, like someone who had finally remembered a nightmare he'd spent half his life trying to forget. Outside, Evelyn had started pacing. We could hear her footsteps, fast and sharp, moving back and forth across the hallway carpet. Every few seconds she knocked again, not violently now, but with an edge of desperation, like she knew the balance of power had changed and she wasn't ready for what came next. Daniel slowly lowered himself into the chair across from me. The photograph and the letter lying between us like two ghosts finally dragged into daylight. "All these years," he whispered, voice hoarse, "you've been dealing with her while I just pretended everything was normal." I watched him, letting the silence stretch, letting him process. He pressed his palms against his, eyes exhaling a fractured sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "She told me the hospital was an accident, that I slipped on the stairs. She said you'd never understand what she's been through." His voice broke. I believed her. I reached out, not to touch him, not yet, but to gently pull the envelope closer. "You didn't want to see the truth," I said softly. "But I did. I saw it every day in the way you flinched when she raised her voice, in the way you apologized before you even spoke. Trauma doesn't disappear, Daniel. You just learned to survive around it." A long silence followed, punctuated only by Evelyn's muffled voice outside the door, shifting between anger and pleading. Daniel stared at the door as if expecting it to open on its own. "She doesn't get to come in anymore," he said finally, the words slow, steady, and deliberate, as if he were building a wall, brick by brick, between himself and the woman who raised him. "Not after this. Not after everything." He stood suddenly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, a new steadiness settling into his posture. "I'm going to talk to her," he said, "but this time, you don't have to protect me from it." For the first time since the morning began, he walked toward the door, not as a scared boy facing a storm, but as a man ready to end a cycle that should have been broken years ago. Daniel stood there holding the old photograph as if it were the last piece of a puzzle he had spent his entire life avoiding. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time since the screaming started at 6 a.m., the apartment felt still, like the walls themselves were waiting for what would come next. I watched him reread the hospital report, his eyes tracing every cruel line, every note written by the attending nurse. Words like suspected guardian involvement and minor refuses to disclose cause of injury hung in the air like ghosts. His breath hitched. Maya, you found this? No, I said quietly. Your aunt gave it to me. She said one day you'd need it. I guess today is that day. Before he could answer, Evelyn's voice crashed through the silence again, shaking, furious, desperate. Daniel, I raised you, and this is how you repay me? Let me in right now. Her pounding restarted, harder, faster, like she wanted to break through both the door and the truth now lying exposed inside. Daniel didn't move toward her. He didn't even look at the door. He looked at the picture, then at me, then back at the picture. And something in him, something that had been tightly bound and strangled since childhood, finally snapped free. His voice was low, cracking. She hits me that night because I got home 10 minutes late. I told myself I fell. I told everyone I fell. I never thought she kept the photos. I never thought anyone else knew. I swallowed. She knows. You know. And now it's time to stop pretending. Outside, Evelyn shrieked louder, the metal charm on her keys clanking like a tiny alarm bell of panic. Daniel, don't you dare believe her. That little girl is turning you against your own blood. Daniel closed his eyes, inhaled slowly, and finally, he faced the door. Mum, he said, his voice steady in a way I'd never heard before. You never had a key to this apartment. You stole one. You invaded our privacy. You crossed every boundary we had. She gasped. Daniel, sweetheart. No. His voice was sharp enough to cut. Not anymore. Her footsteps shifted, the first sign of fear cracking through her rage. Daniel continued, softer now, but firmer than steel. You hurt me, and I let myself forget because remembering was harder than surviving. But seeing this, he held up the photo. I can't unsee it. She banged the door again, weaker this time. I did everything for you. Everything. You did what made you feel powerful, he said, and now you're doing it to Maya. I stepped beside him. For the first time, we stood shoulder to shoulder, not him in front of me, not me behind him, but together. Daniel rested the photo on the counter and reached for something else inside the envelope. The paper. He read the first line aloud. Order of no contact. Evelyn choked on air. You filed that. You dare. I didn't file it, I said quietly. Not yet, but I collected the evidence, and I emailed it to myself. And Daniel, it's your choice now. The hallway went dead silent. Not a scream, not a knock, not a sound, just breathing, hers shaky and uneven. Then, in a thin, cracked voice, Daniel, please. He closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, they were wet, but clear. I'm choosing my wife, he said. And I'm choosing myself. The metallic jingle of her keys stopped completely. Her shadow faded from beneath the door. And for the first time in years, maybe ever, Daniel let out a long, shuddering breath and sank onto the couch, head in his hands. I'm sorry, he whispered, for everything I didn't see, for everything I didn't stop, for everything I buried. I sat beside him. You don't have to be sorry, I said. You just have to be honest. From now on. He nodded. Then he reached for my hand, hesitant, careful, like someone learning how to touch the world without flinching. What do we do now? He asked. We start over, I said. Without keys she shouldn't have. Without secrets that hurt us. Without fear. He breathed out again, slower this time. And as the morning sun crept through the blinds, warming the floor where Evelyn's shadow had disappeared, Daniel whispered the words I'd been waiting months to hear. I'm ready. The lock, our lock, clicked softly as the apartment finally, truly belonged to us.